Outbreak spread to Guinea's capital, Conakry. Right there, Conakry. And this is a city of about 2 million inhabitants. And then he moved over down to Liberia, also still in West Africa. The disease was reported in Lofa and, of course, in Nimba. These are the two counties. They were reported in late March, and by mid-April, the Ministry of Health and Social Welfare had recorded possible cases in Margibi and, of course, in Montserrado counties. Right there on the screen. Also Sierra Leone, Mali, and Ghana also reported identified suspected cases by mid-April, but all clinical samples of suspected cases tested negative for Ebola virus. Gwekekodu, only Gwekekodu, it is the only hotspot where community transmission and deaths were still being reported. You know, the spread across West Africa this time has been pretty much unprecedented. Well, so much has been said about the spread of the Ebola virus. However, what can be done to protect oneself? Well, it appears to be the question on most people's lips. Experts have advised that personal hygiene is a preventive measure. Our colleague at the Voice of America, Carol Persing, also spoke to Dr. Anthony Fauci at the U.S. National Institutes of Health about containing the Ebola virus. Take a listen.
There is no specific anti-Ebola treatment. It's mostly what we call symptomatic. Most people have a tremendous loss of intravascular volume, so you could give them intravenous replacement of fluid or blood transfusions, keep their blood pressure up, treat secondary infections. That's the people who do survive are those who get that sort of treatment. Well, the major challenges are going to be having the people of the country and the health officials and the general public to understand the importance of personal protective measures. And people are not seeming to even admit, in some cases, that there is a problem, not believing that Ebola is there. There have been some very unusual perceptions that it's the health workers that are actually bringing the Ebola in, and there have been some backlashes against, for example, Médecins Sans Frontières, who are trying their best to contain it. And it's a lack of resources to get the appropriate care and treatment, because if you look and talk about the proper way to approach someone, it requires complete total body gowning, masks, goggles, hood, boots, in order not to get any of this material on you. And we're not seeing that. We're seeing some serious lack of attention to the kind of protection that you need when you take care of a sick person. That's one of the first challenges. The second challenge is the fact that it is unlike previous outbreaks, where they usually are in very remote, underpopulated areas of a country, usually in Central Africa. Now you're in a cluster of places where there's a high density of population. So people are going around, and when they get sick, the early part of the illness doesn't necessarily tell you it's Ebola. It's fever, it's not feeling well, a flu-like syndrome. Then when a person starts to get into the very serious aspect, they're confined to bed, they bleed, they have mucous material and body fluids that come into contact with others. But when you have a densely populated area, you might have people who are coming into contact with others that are actually spreading it before they even know it's Ebola.
Coming up on Network Africa, what will it be for Oscar Pistorius as his trial hits the home stretch? I'll be speaking with the legal practitioner Liboros Oshoma, who will be breaking down the court proceedings. Network Africa will be back shortly.
22 airports around the country, an industry that generates billions of naira, connecting millions for business and leisure, will put you through the paces and give you an insider's view on the aviation industry. Watch Aviation This Week only on Channels Television. Aviation This Week, keeping an eye on the aviation industry.
Welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching Network Africa here on Channels Television. Before we move on to the Oscar Pistorius trial, here are some of the stories we are tracking on Network Africa.
Up to 20 people have been killed in the deadliest night of Israeli air raids on Gaza since its current offensive began. The health ministry said most people died in attacks on a house and a cafe in Khan Yunis in the south, bringing the overall death toll to 76. Militants in Gaza continued firing rockets into Israel on Thursday, with sirens sounding over southern towns. Then Iraq has warned the United Nations that Sunni militants have seized nuclear materials used for scientific research at a university in the city of Mosul. In a letter seen by Reuters, Iraq's envoy to the United Nations said nearly 40 kilograms of uranium compounds were seized. The letter appealed for international help to stave off the threat of their use by terrorists in Iraq or abroad. And a gunman has surrendered to police in the United States for allegedly shooting dead 6 people, including 4 of his own children near Houston. One of the suspect's daughters is in a critical condition after being shot in the head, but she was able to direct police to him. After a 20-minute chase, the man's car was surrounded and he gave himself up following a 2-hour standoff.
The murder trial of Oscar Pistorius has resumed following a month-long break to assess the athlete's mental health. But a psychiatric report read to the court says the South African track star, who is on trial for murdering his girlfriend, was not suffering from a mental condition at the time of the shooting. Pistorius, an Olympic and Paralympic sprinter, has admitted to shooting dead his model girlfriend Riva Steenkamp, but maintains he mistook her for an intruder hiding in his toilet in an upmarket Pretoria suburb. The trial, which began in March, took a month-long break to allow the 27-year-old to undergo a mental evaluation at Pretoria's West Koppies Hospital after a forensic psychologist brought by the defense testified that Pistorius had an anxiety disorder. Judge Tokozile Masipa said it was important to find out whether or not the condition affected his criminal responsibility.
At the time of the alleged offences, the accused did not suffer from a mental disorder or mental defect that affected his ability to distinguish between rightful or wrongful nature of his deeds, and a mental disorder or mental defect did not affect his ability to act in accordance with the set appreciation of the rightful or wrongful nature of his deeds.
Got this win this morning?
Both lawyers have accepted the findings of a panel of psychiatrists and psychologists who came to the conclusion after 30 days of evaluation. During the trial, prosecutors have painted a picture of a self-obsessed Pistorius who knowingly killed his law graduate girlfriend as she cowered behind a locked bathroom door. The athlete could face a life sentence if found guilty of the shooting on Valentine's Day last year.
Help us understand exactly what is going on in court in South Africa. A layman would say Pistorius is a murderer. Meanwhile, in some circle, a few people think that he did that out of panic.
What you see in criminal trial, most especially, cases of this nature, and then the defense lawyers and the prosecution trying to outsmart themselves using the technicalities of the law. And mind you, in cases like this, the prosecution first must establish beyond reasonable doubt. Beyond reasonable doubt is also jargon to some people. You must establish to the extent that any reasonable man that hears the story, the only inference he would draw from that story is that, look, this man committed it. And so once you establish beyond that reasonable doubt, the defense now needs to establish in what you see happening here, that this is not ordinary. The man couldn't have done this or that. Even if he did it, he did not do it to achieve this desired intention. He did it to achieve something entirely different, but it's unfortunate that it went this way. That's why you see the defense now trying to establish the fact that, being a disabled, what ordinarily could have come to his